So most people listening to this are going to be that average retail consumer, but everyone is fascinated with the collectors or kind of the investors in wine.
Yep.
We've talked a lot on the podcast in the past about like fine art or the private art market. And to me, the wine investing world seems, somewhat comparable. It's a different product, obviously, but maybe talk a little bit about kind of your understanding of how that world works and what's going on there, and as we've kind of the world has changed a little bit.
Yeah, it's wine investing I think is actually a really interesting kind of alternative asset. If you think about it, it does pretty well if you're the type of person that can spend wisely and then sit on everything and just not consume. It's a little different than art where you're just putting something up on the wall. Like, it would be like if you could, there was some benefit to taking that piece of art down and like destroying it. Wine it sits in your cellar for a certain amount of time and it can really appreciate value, but then you're also tempted to want to just pop it open and drink it and then it's gone. So if you can buy smartly and keep things around, you can actually make a pretty significant amount of money on wine. Now the difference is you need access to it. You need to be able to understand like what the good things are and what aren't. But I think it's a really interesting investment, and you can certainly do well. Where it still is yet to be seen how the tariff situation is going to impact that. I think for the really high end of wine collecting, it's not going to matter too much because I think the same wines are going to be still in just as much demand. Everybody's buying them for the same price anyway. And maybe the acceleration in value is going to slow down a little bit because they're already starting out at a premium. But I still think that over time, those wines are going to be worth a lot more. And you can still do well. What's been interesting in the segment for me is like there's other people are starting to get into this game, and one company in particular that I've kind of like talked with who finds wine collecting to be a fascinating kind of segment for investing. They're starting to try to democratize this a little bit because I think it really has been left up to the collectors and the people who really know wine to make smart decisions when it comes to this. So the average investor isn't actually going to touch it, even though it is a really good investment. You need the access, you need the relationships, you need to know what you're buying. There are companies now that are starting to put some algorithmic structure around how to invest in wines and doing basically all the trading for you. So to me, that's pretty interesting. So I think the industry is evolving and changing a little bit up to that end, but it's yet to be seen like how well some of these things work.
Yeah, so might be a really stupid question, but let's say that you are one of those wine collectors and you're buying, you mentioned earlier, $2,500 bottle of wine. How do you actually know whatever's on the label is actually what's in the bottle? So whether it's the type of wine, where it comes from, how old it is, like all of these things that kind of make up that story and the kind of romantic element that drives the price it appears. Like, how do people actually verify that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, source is a huge part of it. I would imagine it's pretty similar. I don't know much about art collecting, but I would imagine it's pretty similar to that, where there could potentially be like a fake or something like that. But the source is hugely important, whether you're buying directly from the winery itself, or you're buying through an importer, or you're buying through, a retailer like us, for instance, that you can guarantee the provenance and where it's coming from. That's a massive part of it. Outside of that, when you start getting into the world of auctions and trading between collectors or kind of the more open market on wines, it gets tricky. Now, there are a number of people out there that do a lot of work into verification of wines, and there are ways to kind of check for authenticity without necessarily just popping the wine open and checking on it. But you do run some risk. If you watched that movie Sour Grapes, or you've heard of Rudy Carnirwan, who was kind of the famous guy who got arrested for a lot of fraudulent wine sales. There's a lot of fake wine out there on the market. And some of it can be very difficult to tell if it's a fake or not, if they've done a good job. So, you know, unless you're buying it, the best way to know that what you're getting is the real deal is to buy it on release, either from a trusted retailer or from the winery directly. Outside of that, you start to really increase your risk of buying something. There is a percentage risk of buying something fraudulent.